Come on.
Victor DeLegio was from Miami. He was Meyer Lansky's right-hand man. When his prior reputation as an enforcer from 20 years ago was known to never bury a body because he felt it sent a stronger message to leave it in the street. This is the guy we now had to deal with.
Let me give you a taste of a story. One I'd wanted to tell in a documentary that explores the power, the loyalty, and the heartache woven into the lives of men like Jimmy Blue Eyes Allo. Allo was the kind of guy whose presence in New York, Chicago, and Miami held weight, literal and figurative. He wasn't just another cog in the criminal machine. This man was essential to Meyer Lansky, and became even more indispensable when Lansky faced a tragedy that could break even the coldest of men. It was the day Lansky learned that his son was born with a crippling disability, news that hit him like a gut punch. Lucky Luciano, ever perceptive, sensed the storm brewing in his friend. Luciano knew the kind of wrath that could follow if anyone crossed Lansky during this raw, vulnerable moment. So he sent in the one man who could hold Lansky steady, Jimmy Blue Eyes himself. Jimmy knew how to reach people, how to disarm them, how to be more than just a soldier in the ranks. He was a confidant to those who needed a friend in their darkest hours, and so Jimmy stayed by Lansky's side. For days, the two men locked themselves in a room, drinking, talking, or maybe just sitting in silence. Lansky disappeared from the world, slipping away into grief. Then, like a phoenix, he returned a week later, outwardly unchanged, but with a bond between him and Jimmy that would endure for decades. Jimmy Blue Eyes Allo was far more than just another player in New York's underworld. He was a true powerhouse, a link between the titans of organized crime, respected from New York to New Orleans, from smoky backrooms to sunlit golf courses. Among his closest allies was the legendary Charlie Lucky Luciano himself. But Jimmy and Luciano didn't just meet in the shadows. They and their entourage would take to the golf course, alongside men like Frank Costello, Paul Ricca of Chicago, Tony Accardo, and Santo Trafficante. These mob icons would swing their clubs and chat on the greens, rubbing shoulders with senators, judges and politicians, as naturally as if they were one of them. Yet, their camaraderie went beyond golf. Allo, Luciano, Costello, Ricca, Carlos Marcello, Trafficante Jr. as well as Sr., Joe Zerilli of the Detroit Mafia, and other powerhouses often hunted and fished in the southern swamps, frequently on land owned by the notorious Silver Dollar Sam. Whether in Miami, Louisiana, Chicago, or New York, these mob heavyweights found a common bond outside their syndicates, building connections that went deeper than blood. Jimmy Blue Eyes was at the heart of these gatherings, a rare figure who moved seamlessly between the underworld and the circles of the high society they influenced. He was, quite literally, the bridge between two worlds, a man whose mere presence commanded respect and ensured his name would be legendary across the mob's greatest strongholds. Luciano trusted Allo implicitly. In fact, Jimmy was one of the few who kept visiting Luciano in exile in Sicily, keeping the old friendships and alliances alive across oceans. His ties were not just limited to Luciano. Jimmy Blue Eyes was closely associated with the likes of Vito Genovese, a man infamous for his own brutal power plays, and was known as Genovese's attack dog. Cross Lansky, and you'd quickly find Jimmy and Vito's bloodhounds on your trail. He was well acquainted with every prominent figure in the New York crime families: Tommy Lucchese, Carlo Gambino, Joe Bonanno, Joe Profaci, and Russell Bufalino, not to mention his strong connections to Stefano Magaddino's family in Buffalo, as well as the Detroit partnership headed by Joe Zerilli. Jimmy's reach extended south to men like Santo Trafficante and Carlos Marcello, two powerhouse bosses in Florida and Louisiana. And he was respected across the Midwest families as well. When Castro's revolutionaries closed in on Havana, three of the underworld's most powerful figures, Jimmy Blue Eyes Allo, Meyer Lansky, and Russell Bufalino, found themselves on the wrong side of history. For years, these men had virtually owned Cuba, transforming Havana into a playground of vice and luxury. But now the tables were turning. Castro's forces began systematically taking control of strategic posts, and the mobsters were squarely in their crosshairs. As the soldiers approached, the three wise guys saw they had no time to waste. Amid the chaos, a scuffle broke out, and the trio bolted, heading for the fisheries they controlled, hoping to access a boat and flee the island before Castro's grip became inescapable. Airports were under military control, exit routes were dwindling fast, and with each step, the realization of how close they were to losing everything settled in. For Alo, Lansky, and Bufalino, this was not just about escaping Cuba. It was about watching their empire collapse. Left behind in Havana was Santo Traficante, who had decided to stay because his daughter's wedding was days away. That decision would lead to his arrest and the postponement of the wedding, a blow to Traficante's pride and freedom. But for Jimmy and Russell, the priority was survival, and the stress was palpable. Even in the heart-pounding scramble to safety, Jimmy Blue Eyes couldn't help but crack a joke, something to cut the tension as Russell Bufalino chain-smoked cigarette after cigarette. Watching Russell nervously puff away, Jimmy leaned in and made a bet. "I'll put money on it that you can't go the rest of the month without touching a single cigarette." With no hesitation, Russell took the challenge. He threw his cigarette into the water, tossed his entire pack, and pocketed his lighter. It was more than just a wager. It became a commitment, a pact made in the shadow of Cuba's downfall. From that moment on, Russell Bufalino was a changed man. He never smoked another cigarette. Jimmy Blue Eyes kept a close eye on him, watching for any hint of a slip, but Bufalino held his ground. He even went so far as to ban smoking around him entirely. Not even his wife was allowed to light up in his presence. If anyone in his circle needed a smoke, they had to stop the car, step outside, and puff in solitude. It became one of those quiet legends, a story whispered among those who knew him well, a reminder of that fateful night they fled Cuba, and the promise forged in the heat of revolution. This network of contacts gave Jimmy a unique position. It didn't matter if you were the head of a family. Jimmy's connections and reputation alone placed him among the most powerful men in organized crime. Beyond crime, Jimmy's influence reached Hollywood, a world he dabbled in with the same finesse as his other ventures. He'd known Frank Sinatra since he was a kid and had a hand in shaping the careers of some of the biggest stars in American history. He was also closely associated with Willie Moretti, another heavyweight who, like Jimmy, could command respect and attention. When tensions flared and rivalries threatened to spark full-scale wars among the crime families, especially the old-timers, it was often Jimmy Blue Eyes who could bring them back to the table, finding peace where others would only see blood. He was the rare breed of gangster who could both demand respect and foster alliances. A man who, by sheer presence, showed what it truly meant to be a power player in organized crime. This article was meant to tell the end of an era, a closing chapter on men like Lansky, Luciano, and Allo, who lived by a code that went deeper than mere crime. I had planned to use this story to illustrate the decline of the old-school gangsters, men who, despite their ruthlessness, were still respected by those who pursued them, from Justice Department officials to FBI agents. They understood these men, even if they were on opposite sides of the law. Organized crime was brutal, yes, but it was also structured, a dark legacy built by the Italian, Jewish, and Irish mafias that would echo through time. What followed, however, the rise of the Mexican mafia and the Colombian cartels, brought a new level of violence. the brutality ratcheted up as if the stakes had changed, as if the blood they spilled had a different price tag. Money, power, control, whatever fueled it, the brutality left even the old guard speechless. Yet the legacy of men like Lansky, Luciano and Arlo remains etched in history, a testament to an era that lives on in shadowed whispers and stories passed down through generations. Here's the article in full, a snapshot of the last of the real gangsters, the end of an era, a tribute to men who were, in some strange way, respected by those who hunted them. When I first met Vincent Arlo, he was old, grey and grizzled. He shuffled outside his once stately Art Deco house in Hollywood's old South Lake section, wearing a blue golf shirt buttoned at the neck that clashed with his yellow Bermuda shorts and black dress socks. I would never have taken him for an organized crime boss known as Jimmy Blue Eyes. Though he had visited exotic spots across the globe, from Tunisia to Hawaii, he still sounded unmistakably like he was from the Bronx. Words came out as foim instead of firm, owin instead of earning, and woid instead of word. In 1993 and 1994, Jimmy occasionally invited me over with my tape recorder. The following story is based on 12 hours of conversations we shared. We had an understanding that I would not print anything while he was alive. He passed away on March 9th after suffering 2 strokes in 1 year. True to his nature, he never gave anyone up. When Vincent, Jimmy Blue Eyes, Arlo died, so did the world of the gentleman gangster. Gerald Schur, a retired Justice Department official who established the Federal Witness Protection Program, described him as one of the very last of the breed. A breed that fancied spats, but avoided ventures like the drug trade. Arlo was also one of the most famously quoted figures of his time. During a congressional racketeering probe in the 1950s, he deadpanned, "To the best of my recollection, I don't remember." Born on May 27, 1904, Arlo outlived most of his organized crime contemporaries by decades. This long list included Al Capone, who had a vacation estate in Miami Beach, Arthur Dutch Schultz, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, Louis Lepke Buchalter, Charlie Lucky Luciano, Albert Anastasia, Jacob Gura Shapiro, Jack Legs Diamond, Vito Genovese, Carlo Gambino, Thomas Three-Finger Brown Lucchese, and Joe Adonis. Arlo was actually brown-eyed, but he earned his nickname from the black and blue shiners he got from fighting as a kid. Later, as a gangster, he operated in the shadow of his more famous counterpart, Meyer Lansky, South Florida's most renowned mobster and a principal architect of modern organized crime. During a time when the mob's brazen exploits both shocked and fascinated the average working person, Arlo was quietly building a gambling empire. By the time high-profile informants and politicians worked to dismantle the mafia myth, if not the families themselves, he had comfortably retired in southeast Broward County, a region he and Lansky had famously put on the gangland map during the 1940s. Their carpet joints in Hollywood and Hallandale offered high-stakes gamblers a new level of sophistication years before the first Las Vegas casino even lit up. They ran glamorous hotels in pre-Castro Havana and left their mark on the course of American politics. Jimmy was what he was back in the old days, said his close friend Thomas Sobek. Then he became like an elder statesman. According to Richard Bloom, a Sarasota bingo parlor owner whose late father, Joe Bloom, had partnered with Arlo in ventures like the old Hollywood Yacht Club and the Riviera in Havana, Arlo's primary role in the mob was to keep turf disputes from escalating into full-blown conflicts. When there was a dispute between the families, he would mediate. Arlo purposely kept a low profile. "I'm not an actor," he once said. "If I were, I'd look for publicity." Arlo, the Harlem-born son of Italian immigrants, and Lansky, the diminutive Polish-born Jew, made a fortune together. Generously sharing much of their wealth with friends, relatives, and charities, they became almost Robin Hood-like folk heroes. Jimmy took care of the Catholics, and Meyer took care of the Jews, recalled Hope Kaller, who bought Alo's two-story Hollywood lakefront home in 1994, and often hosted him there when he quickly visited to reminisce. The two men remained as close as brothers until Lansky's death in 1983 in Miami Beach. Certain rules guided their lives. The drug trade was strictly off-limits. Gerald Scher, who founded the Federal Witness Protection Program, remembers that federal agents were untouchable. Women, Alo said, never knew anything. Nobody bothered your kids, your family. Things were different. People were more civilized. Deals were often sealed without a single word recorded. Kaller and her architect husband, Joe, learned this firsthand when they bought the house on Monroe Street, finding not just a bullet hole in the curved glass picture window, but also discovering that Alo lacked a deed for part of the property. Technically, it belonged to the descendants of a friend who owed Alo money. They shook hands, and no papers were ever signed, said Hope Kaller, an interior designer who restored the house to its original grandeur after Alo moved to Hollywood's Sea Air Towers. We had to track down the friend's great-granddaughter in Las Vegas, who then signed off on the land. It was the most comical thing at the closing. Jimmy said, "Hope. He was my friend. He owed me. Shake hands with me and you can have the land." I told him, "Jimmy, unfortunately, that's not how it works." Alo was a passionate golfer, an avid student of history, and a dedicated news enthusiast. He had strong opinions on everything, from free trade to the national deficit and local South Florida politics. "I read about a certain Broward County official," he said in 1993. "She is a real thief. I am supposed to be the bad guy. I know plenty of unsavory characters, but at least I tried to live by a principle. But these politicians, the people are just here to be robbed. They will bleed you dry, those sons of bitches." Alo served 2 prison sentences. 5 years for a 1923 armed bank robbery in Manhattan. His 2 accomplices escaped, and Jimmy never betrayed them, and another 5 years in the 1970s for obstruction of justice. The latter case involved a French company called Scopitone, which manufactured a jukebox that played short films of scantily clad women performing the selected songs. Miami Beach attorney Alvin Malnick held exclusive United States rights to produce it. New York's United States Attorney Robert Morgenthau initiated a 5-year investigation in 1965 after Malnick sold his Scopitone shares to Telesign, sparking a huge surge in Telesign's stock. Alo was accused of providing evasive answers to the Securities and Exchange Commission about his involvement. After the 1923 bank job, Alo refused to name his accomplices, despite, he claimed, police beating the crap out of me before sending him to Sing Sing. "Even then, you learned certain principles," he said. "I do not care what people think of me. I can sleep at night because I did not wrong my fellow man, at least not individually. The big corporations, who cares? They are robbing everyone anyway, so it is tit for tat the way I see it." Alo described himself as a good candidate for rehabilitation. There could not have been a better candidate. "I was smart, but when I came out of Sing Sing, I was 1,000% smarter than when I went in," he said with a hearty laugh. So, who wanted to go to work? Casually, he shed his shirt to reveal a dime-sized bullet wound on his chest. "Sure, I got shot," he said nonchalantly. "It was a .38. They said it was a close call. It was in New York. I was just walking along." If circumstances had been different at a certain point in history, Vincent Alo might have become a legitimate businessman, perhaps even a tycoon. But early 20th century America offered few options for first-generation Americans. "I never knew about discrimination," he said, "but as I got around in life, I realized Italians were considered dirt back then." The son of a Calabrian tailor, Alo left school after the 8th grade. In 1918, he became a messenger on Wall Street with Hayden Stone, which was bigger than Merrill Lynch in those days. After 5 years and minor advancements, he had 2 revelations. He was the only Italian in the firm, and Irish and German newcomers hired after him were promoted ahead of him. Later on, I found out that was company policy. Everybody liked me, but Italians were considered the scum of the earth, lower than black people. So I quit the firm. Instead of going one way, he paused, shrugged and chuckled, I went the other way. That other way was organized crime. Society made him what he was back then, said Thomas Sobek. He couldn't get promoted, so he started robbing payrolls. Allo never made excuses for his life. He and Lansky were simply following the basic capitalist principle of supply and demand. When Prohibition-era Americans wanted alcohol, they provided it. When Depression and World War II-era Americans craved games of chance, they met the demand. I was in the gambling business, he said in 1993. Big deal. The whole country's in the gambling business today. I am not out killing kids or molesting them. I am not mugging old ladies. What was organized crime? Everyone is so paranoid about organized crime. Today, with all the other groups around and all the crime in the streets, they wish organized crime were back again. Allo reserved a unique loathing and scorn for Robert Kennedy, who, as United States Attorney General under his brother, President John F. Kennedy, waged war on the syndicate. Bobby Kennedy was a vicious, mean son of a bitch, Allo said. Personally, if anyone wanted to kill Bobby Kennedy, it should have been me. It is a good thing they found that Arab, Sirhan, who killed him, because who knows, they could have accused organized crime. He rejected the idea that the mob had a hand in President Kennedy's assassination. Someone connected with the government had a reason to kill him, not organized crime. We would want to kill the other one, Bobby. In 1929, Allo met Florence Kane, a dark-haired beauty from Long Island whom he married. It was a mixed marriage since Florence was Irish. After she died in 1990, Allo lived among the remnants of her last redecoration in the 70s, which included yellow velour upholstery, antique white French provincial furniture, gold flocked wallpaper, Venetian glass mirrors, and damask fainting couches. A framed photo of Frank Sinatra's parents prominently sat on the living room coffee table. In the master bedroom, a crucifix hung across from a portrait of Pope John XXIII. There is no doubt he loved Florence deeply. Yet, as was the custom among men of his kind, he had another woman, who still lives in South Florida and had been part of his life for 30 years. She attended his funeral to pay her respects. The same year he met Florence, he also met Lansky. At the time, he was on the lam, fleeing from the law, for a crime he would not discuss. Meyer was in the bootleg business, and I was in the beer business in the Bronx, thriving despite the Depression's economic devastation. We hit it off and got along very well. His best friend then was Charlie Lucky, Luciano. He was a sweetheart. I do not care what they write about him. He got kangarooed wronged by the law. From there, we went into the gambling business, the sports business, bookmaking, prostitution, drugs. They threw everything but the kitchen sink at us, trying to make us monsters. If anyone got into drugs, they had to walk away. But everything that was illegal, they accused me of. Allo's arrival in South Florida was orchestrated by a gangster named Julian Potatoes Kaufman. He was originally from Chicago. We used to hang out at the Piccadilly Hotel in the New York Theatre District, used to play gin there. In 1936, Kaufman got a proposition in Broward County. Jimmy, he says, I got the district attorney and the sheriff down there. They are friends of mine, and they are looking for someone to open up a gambling joint. The sheriff was Walter Clark, a great guy. He had his own route, slot machines all over the county. It was wide open. Everyone was broken here, and you could do whatever you wanted. It was more like pioneering. It was the depths of the Depression. and everyone was just trying to make $1. Kaufman opened a rustic but popular betting and gaming saloon on US Highway 1 near the Dade-Broward line, called The Plantation. According to Allo, Kaufman invited him and Lansky to participate. In his 1991 biography, Little Man, Meyer Lansky, and The Gangster Life, author Robert Lacey tells it differently, stating that after locals threatened to shut Kaufman down, Allo offered to protect and invest in the business, spreading so much cash to South Florida civic groups, believed to be from the Detroit and Cleveland syndicates, that the threat dissipated. They later renamed it The Farm. "We put bingo in there," Allo recalled. "It was such a big business that people were playing bingo outside in the parking lot because they couldn't get inside." Before long, they owned shares in various South Florida establishments. Ben Marden's Colonial Inn, just south of Gulfstream Racetrack, Club Bohème, Green Acres, the Beach Club, the Hollywood Yacht Club, the Hollywood Country Club, the Little Palm Club, and the Island Club. The Colonial Inn was their crown jewel, attracting a clientele draped in fur and dripping with diamonds. It also featured the biggest names in entertainment, including Xavier Cugat, Eddie Cantor, Carmen Miranda, Sophie Tucker, and Joe Louis. These clubs flourished until the late 1940s, fading into history after Democratic Senator Estes Kefauver of Tennessee convened the Senate Special Committee to investigate crime in interstate commerce in 1950. It ran for 2 years, during which both Lansky and Allo were compelled to testify. "Until then," Allo said, "things were free and easy. You did not realize it was so wonderful because you were living it. Now you look back and think, geez, those days were really great. You feel nostalgic. And I have lived through it all." About the FBI. "We used to meet at the Singapore Hotel in Miami Beach every afternoon for lunch when Meyer was alive. There were usually 5 or 6 of us around the table. We would discuss the news of the day, whatever was controversial in the papers, and football games. Every once in a while the FBI would show up, 2 or 3 agents together. The FBI had a 24-hour tail on me and Meyer. They had an Italian guy on me, Fontanella, dirty bastard. Mean. I asked him, 'Did you graduate college?' He said, 'Yeah.' I asked, 'Did you graduate just to follow me?' I liked to stick it to them, make them feel small. They were getting on my nerves." J. Edgar Hoover, in 1993, an unauthorized biography, claimed that Lansky had blackmailed Hoover into leaving the mob alone, with a photo of the late FBI director in a compromising situation with another man. Is it true? There was never any such picture. If there was, I would have known about it, being so close to Meyer. Bobby Kennedy. "He passed a law against interstate gambling when he came in, that son of a bitch. He went after my brothers," referring to a New York travel agent now deceased and a doctor who had retired to Fort Lauderdale. "He really put me out of business." Allo claimed that Kennedy targeted him because he refused an intermediary's request to support John F. Kennedy's campaign in Illinois. Frank Sinatra. "I knew him from when he was a kid. He always wanted to be a gangster, that phony bastard. I was the best friend he ever had. He was always in trouble with the boys, and I had to step in. He was supposed to do things for them, but he never did." The IRS. "I file my taxes. For occupation, I put gambling when we had it, and when we did not have it. I used to go to the track all the time. I got audited every year, but not anymore. I even filed more than I made sometimes. I told them, I'm a good handicapper. The guy says, 'Then maybe I'll go with you.' I told him, 'Fine. Maybe you'll win some money.'" Cuba. "The labor union was our partner there, in the Riviera Hotel. Castro shut down the gambling. Everyone had to leave. We lost a lot of money. It could have been the greatest gambling spot in the world. Havana had international flavor. People came for good times and everything. Do you see how Vegas grew? This could have been bigger. You already had a city built up in Havana, and the climate and atmosphere were different. You had to dress up. Women liked that.